This Late Night Linux Family podcast is made possible by our patrons. Go to latenightlinux.com/support for details of how you can join them. Support us on Patreon for access to ad-free episodes and early releases. That's latenightlinux.com/support. 2.5 Admins, episode 268. I'm Joe.
I'm Jim.
And I'm Alan.
And here we are again. And before we get started, your customary Clara article plug, Alan, is optimizing ZFS for high throughput storage workloads.
Yeah, so this week's article, we talk about how to tune the ARC and especially ZFS's new prefetch algorithm to get the most out of your system, and also doing things like using metadata VDEVs to accelerate things, using direct I/O to let your applications control what gets cached and what doesn't, and how to optimize the record size.
Right, well, link in the show notes as usual. Red Hat had a GitLab instance that was breached by attackers. And slowly but surely, we keep learning more and more about this, and it keeps getting worse and worse in terms of customer data that has been stolen and is seemingly being released to the public.
You know, personally, I think the biggest thing that we ought to be learning that somehow we never seem to do is that it's dangerous to put all your stuff in the same basket that everybody else puts all of their stuff, so that all it takes is one person getting into that one basket to get at everybody's stuff. It's dangerous.
Is that the case here, though? Like, isn't it just a selection of their customers? It's not all of their customers, right?
It seems to be Red Hat's consulting department. So this is when you bring on Red Hat to help you solve specific problems. And so they have these separate cases. At least 5,000 of those 28,000 repos contain a confidentiality.markdown file talking about how the data has major implications if it becomes public and so on. So there's a lot of pretty serious stuff in there. Apparently it includes sometimes like, network maps and detailed information about the infrastructure and case histories and like the problems they've had and the things they've fixed, and sometimes like VPN credentials to connect to the customer site.
API keys potentially as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. All the stuff that was given to Red Hat to be able to work on a specific problem for the customer. And so it is not clear, but I imagine a lot of these customers didn't know that there is a repo at Red Hat that contained all this information. They expect Red Hat had that information somewhere, but it's unlikely most of the customers actually have access to this GitLab instance. It is just where Red Hat internally keeps the stuff. It may be that they also allow customers to have access to it, but then that gets even more to Jim's point of maybe you don't want one giant GitLab instance for that.
Yeah, and to be clear, GitLab have come out and said this is nothing to do with us. It might be our software, but this is very much self-hosted. This is not our fault.
Right. This is definitely the self-hosted inside of Red Hat.
Who had the vulnerabilities, where they came from, whether it was in the software or the configuration or the social engineering or this, that, the other, it's kind of irrelevant to the point that I'm making, which is that we know that we had more than 28,000 repositories with confidential data in them. We don't know how many average repositories per individual Red Hat customer we're talking about, but if we assume it's between roughly 1 and 10, then we're talking about roughly between 3,000 and 30,000 companies' confidential data that was all in one place to all get messed with by one attacker at one time via one entry point. And that's not something that happens when that data lives in 3,000 or 30,000 different places, because it's kept on site at the client location and because entry is carefully managed, and you're not just, for example, allowing a vendor to just slap you on the same VPN that anybody on their entire flat company network can like route out to. Exposure is a problem. You have to manage it.
Yeah, and like to Jim's point, even if Red Hat had done a containerized instance of GitLab per customer or a VM per customer, that likely would have contained this breach to one of those instances. Like, unless it was some class thing where they could figure out how to enumerate all 28,000 instances or 3,000 instances if they did per customer or whatever it happened to be, it's unlikely they would have had, if Red Hat security policy was reasonable, they wouldn't have got everything. They would have got one customer's set of things or, a dozen repos instead of 30,000 repos. So it really does go to say Red Hat was being very uncareful with this stuff. And also, there seems to be a lot of stuff that's more than 5 years old. And I can understand the value to both the customer and to Red Hat of keeping those older case files, but maybe they need some kind of tiering policy where that stuff gets archived and doesn't live in the live instance, so that if there is a compromise, less of that data is exposed. And if they need it in the future, they can go and pull it out of the archive instead of, again, just having all of these very shiny golden eggs in one basket. Red Hat's taken pains to say that, the attackers didn't have access to Red Hat's internal repos. So there's not the same kind of a supply chain impact that there might be if all of Red Hat used a different GitLab instance that contains all the actual source code for RHEL, then with the same kind of access, they could have pushed some commits into the repo, using somebody else's name or account, or, added their own SSH key to somebody else's account as administrator and put bugs purposely in RHEL. But in this case, it seems Red Hat does keep their code in a different GitLab instance than all this customer stuff, but they don't keep the different customers separate from each other.
The only realistic way to mitigate the spread of this kind of stuff through, again, thousands of customers' data is to silo that data. And yes, that does make it less convenient to work on any one arbitrary client's data. But then that just begs the question, okay, well, what kind of employees are we talking about? They're all IT professionals, huh? They all specialize in working with operating systems and applications. Okay, well, that gives us a baseline of competence we can expect for them to deal with, administrivia on the IT side of stuff, right? And so then the question just becomes, well, how important is your client's security to you?
It doesn't exactly inspire confidence in the company, does it?
It doesn't inspire confidence in the entire industry, to be honest. It's very convenient to rail on Red Hat about this right now because they made that decision right now. But which huge tech company are you going to name that doesn't play it fast and loose with customer data and have leaks like this where we're like, why the hell were you doing it that way? I do want to make one final thing clear because I feel like it might be confusing for some listeners. When we say that all of these thousands of repositories are on one instance, we're not just talking about like they were all on one physical server or one virtual machine. They were all in one GitLab instance, as in you log in as one user and have immediate access to all of these repositories. There may or may not have been some in-application attempt at, user security. We don't know the answer to that one. I don't have a lot of confidence. And, the flip side of that is that, once somebody gets a toehold, well, privilege escalation is never very difficult on the red team side of things. Like once you give a red team a toehold, you can imagine they are going to laterally migrate one way or another. You get one GitLab account, you pretty much have to assume you got all of them. If you don't assume that, well, ideally you are GitLab yourself and you're intimately familiar with that code because you develop it and you can figure out exactly what went on. And you have very direct policies to deal with all this. And all these are the kind of considerations that a company that wants to be GitLab is probably going to think about fairly hard. But a company that's Red Hat probably isn't gonna.
Who remembers back in April when we talked about Synology forcing their customers to buy expensive marked up hard drives from them to put in their storage appliances? Well, fast forward a few months and here we are. They have backtracked on that. They're going to let people put in just normal WD and Seagate drives.
I seem to be having the opportunity a lot of times lately to say, it's always a conversation. It's a negotiation. You just have to be willing to talk. And I think a lot of Synology's customers spoke pretty loudly.
Yeah, although it says in the latest Disk Station Manager update, some of the 2025 model year products, including Plus Value and J Series, will support the installation and storage pool creation of non-validated third-party drives. There's a lot of some and specific year and so on. They're still hedging pretty hard, I think. But my biggest takeaway from this is, if they've burned you once, do you really trust them not to try to pull this shit again in not too distant future?
You never pay the Dane is the classical allusion I would have reached for.
Yeah, and it's not just this, right? Because they've also removed graphics drivers and H.264 transcoding support, which seemingly is just about licensing. They just didn't want to pay the licensing for the transcoding stuff.
Right. The royalties for HEVC or H.265 is quite onerous.
It's around $1.50 a box. What do they retail for again?
Is it just one time?
I was researching this before the show, and I found that back in the napkin math, about $1.20 per device was the estimate that people seem to be accepting widely on Reddit, but I didn't look into enough detail to really give it a lot of confidence or say lifetime or annually. I don't know. I will firmly state for the record, though, that I do believe that it is not a huge amount in comparison to what those boxes sell for. And this is just another case of at what point does a company value a quick couple bucks extra in their pockets over your experience using their product?
Well, yeah. And this is really starting to bite them. I mean, I don't have any data on this, but I've got a bit of anecdotal evidence. I know two people who were basically diehard Synology fans because of just how easy that whole ecosystem is. Yeah, you're paying a little bit more for them, but all of the backup stuff and like loads of features on them. But those people have ditched them and have now built their own boxes with TrueNAS, I think.
It's always a huge mistake to take things away that you gave to a customer. You can have very happy customers offering very simple products and very few of them and have everything work out just fine. And then you can start tarting those products up with a whole bunch of features. And, initially those features don't even really matter. Just, you're kind of bored. You wanted to innovate, right? But, then you take those features away and it makes people mad. They're like, why are you taking this away? This is a thing I already had. And, you're not giving me any money back. You're just taking it away from me. This sucks. It's not hard to understand those outraged customers' viewpoint, to be honest.
Well, yeah. And I feel very glad that I did not go down the appliance route because it was a very attractive offering until they started rug pulling.
I feel like that's the problem with most of these luxury IT appliance brands, for lack of a better descriptor. It's not like Synology is the only one. There are a lot of them, but basically, these brands where it's like, okay, look, you don't have to know a lot. You will have to pay a bit more. You'll get an awful lot of shiny features, and it's really easy to use. And that can absolutely be a good deal if you understand the entirety of it at the time that you sign on to it. The problem is that the thing that made the extra money worthwhile was, the extra care put into the product, and it's never forever. The prices don't go down. The features disappear. And now it's like, okay, well, now I have to pay as much as I'd pay for anything else. And it's not any better than anything else. And it took away my stuff. And even above the completely rational aspect of it, like you can say, okay, from a purely rational point of view, they have invested less into the thing that costs more now. This is an objectively worse deal for me. Therefore, this is bad. So I'm upset. That's the purely rational perspective. But we're not purely rational. We're human, and we also very directly see you took it away from me. And what do you do when somebody snatches something out of your hands? You get mad. Turns out, a lot of the time you get mad even when you didn't even really like that thing. People will still get really mad about something disappearing they didn't even actually use, but they're mad now that it's gone. Now you make it a feature that people actually use and enjoy, and you take it away, yeah, you get a revolt.
Synologies are sold in boxes in stores as well, right? If you buy something on the box, it says it does H.264 and HEVC transcoding, and you get it home and it doesn't, isn't that false advertising?
I mean, in 2025, what are you going to do?
Yes. There's a EULA inside the box that you agreed to when you opened it.
Yeah.
How many products do you think you could walk through your local big box store and find that made claims on the box that had been superseded by changes to the back-end service since that box was filled at the factory? Hell, how many of them do you think the claims on the box never matched their reality right from the get-go, from the day it was put in the box? It's a lot. Nobody ever really seems to do much about it.
Yeah, I imagine half the boxes will have some kind of disclaimer that says subject to change with the software.
Yeah, probably.
But again, this is why I'm so glad that I just built a commodity PC effectively for my storage appliance and installed Ubuntu on it. Like, okay, fair enough, Canonical could pull some bullshit, but I wouldn't be just shit out of luck, would I? I could just move to Debian or SUSE or Fedora or whatever. Like, that's the beauty of being in control. Obviously, there are downsides to it. You don't have this shiny interface that's just click, 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 done. But I'm glad I invested the time.
I have infected him with the Salter philosophy. Honestly, Joe, you just articulated like a lot of careful thought I have put into the way that I use computers for decades now. The forward mobility, the portability, the not getting trapped and isolated, behind something that evolved out from under me. Like that has genuinely informed a huge amount of, my career. And I really did put a lot of thought into that about how do I make sure that the work that I do now isn't lost going forward? And yeah, keeping it really simple, avoiding the shiny bells and whistles, avoiding the onerous proprietary contracts, and opting for things that are as open and widely supported and as least modified as possible. Yep, that is the Salter IT philosophy. Welcome. We have cookies.
I mean, worst case scenario, I could always use FreeBSD. I mean, I tried it. I talked about it. It was fine.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things I appreciate so much about ZFS is that it's completely cross-platform, including across hardware. Even if this, RISC big endian thing becomes a big deal again, and suddenly we're back to big endian computers being a thing, mainstream, the fact that it's a file system that is fully bi-endian, at the time you write the block, it knows whether it needs to bit flip it or not, or byte swap it. Just the ability to use it on whatever hardware and whichever OS you want really gives you the power to know your data is not locked into some ecosystem. Whether that's ecosystem is hardware or an operating system or a hardware architecture.
You almost snuck a power to serve in there, Alan. I caught that.
Your data is kind of locked into the ZFS ecosystem, but that is an open ecosystem, and that's the difference.
Right, but it's more open than even a lot of other software, right? It's works on at least 4 different flavors of operating system, like completely different kernels, not just different distros of Linux. You can use it on FreeBSD, Linux, Windows, Mac, or Solaris. That's a lot of options. You can use it on x86, ARM, PowerPC, Big Endian, Little Endian, RISC-V, whatever. All of those.
I think you'd have to look at something like maybe exFAT to get a more widely platform-ported file system, honestly.
Yeah, if you can get in the right patent grant group to be allowed to use it.
But you look at those Synology boxes, right, and they are very small, very neat. The interface is really good. The features are really good. I can totally see why people got sucked in by them.
They didn't have the Salter philosophy.
Yep, indeed. Let's do some free consulting then. But first, just a quick thank you to everyone who supports us with PayPal and Patreon. We really do appreciate that. And if you want to send in your questions for Jim and Alan or your feedback, you can email show@2.5admins.com. Another perk of being a patron is you get to skip the queue, which is what Olaf has done. How do I back up dataset attributes without breaking the destination system? For example, mount points that would mount to root. I have one backup pool, which I could import without mounting, but there is also data on there which I'd like to access in a normal way. Perhaps dumping explicitly set attributes and reapplying them on restore?
So there's a couple of different approaches here. One of the most common ones is when you set the attribute on the backup, you use user properties. So it would be something like, backup : and then the property name equals the property value so that they're stored there as part of the backup, but they don't actually apply to the backup. This can also be helpful if, for example, on your backup, you want to use more compression than you normally do, but you want to remember what the setting is for the restored system and things like that. So that can do a lot. Another thing that I've been working on personally as part of my hackathon project for OpenZFS is in ZFS, there's a property for the pool called altroot, which allows you to specify an alternative route, basically a path to be prefixed to all the mount points. So that, for example, if you're using ZFS on root and you have something mounted as root and you want to import a pool from a virtual machine or another computer and work on it, you can say prefix all the mounts with /mnt or some other directory so that they won't conflict. And I've been looking at a way to do that on a per dataset basis. So you could, for example, on your backup pool, have a dataset called backup that's maybe mounted to /backup, and then a dataset under that of the host name of each machine. And it has this kind of alt root property that says, on all my children, force their mount points to be prefixed with this thing. So even if the child of backup /hostname has a mount point of /, it always inherits the mount point from its parent so that that gets put on in front of or prefixed with the mount point. And this would allow all of your machines that happen to have a / dataset to be mounted, but not as / conflicting with everything. But that doesn't exist yet. So either using user properties or some replication tools like ZXfer have an option to basically make a text file with all the properties in it that you can back up as well and then be able to restore.
You can also, in the meantime, with the tools that we have available to us right now, one of my most common workarounds for this sort of an issue is to make a parent data set on the target and set its can mount property to no, and then it's not really going to matter what the mount points are of the things that you're replicating inwards. They shouldn't be mounting anyway.
Another option is to use the property override system in ZFS. So on the ZFS receive side, you can actually override a certain property. So even if the property is being copied over, you can force it to not have its value. So you could set the can mount property to no auto so that none of the backed up datasets will mount automatically, but you can still manually mount them using ZFS mount, the dataset name, and optionally a different path than the default. And that would let you still back up the mount point, but not have it automatically mount and cause problems.
Hearing about these difficulties, one of the things that it would be good to take away from this, if you're dreaming of your own ZFS stuff, is that you can avoid a lot of these problems by not using a lot of hard set mount points in the first place. Like, for instance, if you're doing a ZFS on root desktop, your root dataset is going to need to be mounted at the root of the file system. But you really don't need to set explicit mount points on any of the datasets below that. You just need to create them in the right hierarchical order beneath root so that they automatically get mounted there. For example, if you have a dataset that is literally named root and it has a child that's named var, and if the dataset named root is mounted at the root of the file system, well, guess what? The dataset named var will automatically get mounted at var beneath root. So you don't need to force that mount point attribute on each of those data sets. You really just need to kind of set a root and then create data sets where they ought to be for the rest. Don't make the mistake of creating an unnecessarily spaghetti-coded file system. It might feel clever when you first do it, and you might be like, wow, I'm a wizard. Look at all the things that I avoid doing. I remember that feeling from when I was a teenager using go-to statements in BASIC, and eventually I learned why that was a bad idea. This is pretty much the same thing, just storage instead of programming.
Right, well, we'd better get out of here then. Remember, show@2.5admins.com if you want to send any questions or your feedback. You can find me at joelrest.com/mastodon.
You can find me at mercenariesysadmin.com.
And I'm at Alan Jude.
We'll see you next week.